Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. In the Imperium of Man, loyalty is the highest virtue, a sacred bond forged in blood, duty, and unshakable faith. None proclaim it louder than the Ultramarines, blue-armored paragons, guardians of Macragge, champions of order. They are the very image of imperial virtue. Yet beneath the polished ceramite, beyond the dogma and duty, something deeper stirs. The Ultramarines do not just fight for the Emperor. They build, they rule, they shape the very future of humanity. And as we peer into the heart of their domain, a question begins to claw its way up from the abyss. Are the Ultramarines simply the Imperium's best, or are they preparing to become the Imperium itself? There is a grandeur to Ultramar that sets it apart, a calculated elegance that whispers of empire. Guilliman does not merely lead armies, he restores, reclaims, and rewrites. The Codex Astartes, the Indomitus Crusade, the vast machine of governance springing from Macragge, these are not the acts of a dutiful son. They are the work of a builder of civilizations. As the Imperium burns, as other worlds fall to madness and entropy, Ultramar thrives. Perhaps the Emperor's dream never truly died. Perhaps it lives on, quietly, efficiently, in the hands of his most loyal son. Or perhaps, just perhaps, that loyalty is transformed into something far more dangerous. To stand within Ultramar is to witness an impossible contradiction. Serenity amid war, prosperity amid apocalypse, civilization amid the rotting corpse of a galaxy. This is not the grimdark decay of hive cities choked by ash, nor the blood-streaked shrines of the ecclesiarchy's madness. This is a realm that breathes, with functioning infrastructure, with governance, with art, culture, and even justice. It is the dream of the Imperium, not as it exists, but as it was once intended to be. While much of the galaxy burns under the cruel glare of fanaticism and dysfunction, Ultramar remains a flickering echo of the Emperor's utopia. It is no wonder, then, that some whisper not of loyalty, but of legacy. For if the rest of the Imperium crumbles and fails, Ultramar endures, and that endurance is not accidental. Macragge, the capital world, is no mere fortress monastery. It is the core of a complex network of star systems united by efficiency, mutual defense, and shared culture. 24 core worlds form the backbone of Ultramar, each one governed not as an afterthought, but with deliberate care. Roads are maintained, trade flows, cities function. There is a kind of secular sanctity in the way these planets operate, a living manifestation of Guilliman's belief that order is not just preferable, but essential. The Adeptus Administratum weeps under the weight of its own contradictions across the Imperium. But on Macragge, bureaucracy does not strangle, it breathes life. What makes this remarkable is not simply that Ultramar works, but that it works so differently. The Imperium thrives on fear, stagnation, and blind faith, yet Ultramar rewards discipline, merit, and clarity. Education exists here, not just indoctrination. Civilians are protected by planetary defense forces that are actually trained and equipped. Resources are allocated based on logistical sense, not divine whim. And while psychers are still monitored and mutants are still distrusted, the zealotry that defines so much of imperial society finds no firm footing in this region. Guilliman's rule, even after millennia of slumber, has reasserted itself with brutal, calculated efficiency. He has not just returned, he has resumed command. This divergence is not merely administrative, it is philosophical. Ultramar is governed not by the High Lords of Terra, but by its own tetrarchs, appointed officials who answer directly to Guilliman. While they pay nominal fealty to the Imperium, their power stems not from titles, but from real, functioning governance. Some of these tetrarchs are Ultramarines themselves, others are carefully selected civilians, but all serve a central authority rooted not in Terra's crumbling bureaucracy, but in Macragge's living system. This is a functional power structure that could persist even if the Astronomicon failed, even if Terra itself fell. And herein lies the seed of suspicion. When the galaxy itself falters, and yet Ultramar does not, what conclusion must be drawn? Is it simply that Guilliman is more competent than the corpse politicians of Terra? Or is Ultramar intended to survive what the rest of the Imperium cannot? Does Guilliman, or those closest to him, envision a time when this empire within becomes not just a bastion, but the new heart of mankind's future? The warp storm that split the galaxy, the Cicatrix Maledictum, made travel near impossible across much of Imperial space. But Ultramar adapted, fortified, and persisted. It became a beacon in the darkness, not merely through faith, but through planning. Even in the way Ultramar treats its own people, we see the difference. Citizens here are not expendable. They are assets, not in the cold, exploitative sense of Mechanicus resource quotas, but as participants in a grand societal project. The cultural values of discipline, honor, and civic duty are taught from birth. Children grow up not just fearing heresy, but aspiring to excellence. The dream of service, in the PDF, in the administrative corps, or for the rare and gifted few, in the ranks of the Ultramarines themselves, binds them. It is a self-reinforcing system that breeds not just loyalty, but a belief in Ultramar itself. In this way, Guilliman has done what the Imperium as a whole has long failed to do. He has created a sustainable model, a template, a realm that might, just might, outlast the long night. And if such a model exists, it begs a darker question. Why is it not being applied everywhere? Is it resistance from Terra, jealous of its own decaying traditions? Or is Guilliman intentionally keeping Ultramar separate, preserving its strength while the rest of the galaxy bleeds? The answer may lie not in what Ultramar has, but in what it lacks. It lacks the Inquisition's boot on every doorstep. It lacks the madness of ecclesiarchs burning books and butchering scholars. It lacks the internecine warfare of the High Lords. In short, it lacks the rot. This is not accidental. This is by design. When Robot Guilliman returned from his millennia-long stasis, the galaxy was shattered. The Imperium teetered on the edge of annihilation, caught between the nightmare of chaos and the inertia of its own institutions. His awakening was not just a miracle. It was a rupture. A Primarch, once thought lost, stepped into a broken empire and found not the vision of his father, but a religious tyranny stifled by incompetence. Guilliman did not rejoin the Imperium as a soldier alone. He returned as a statesman, a reformer, a ruler. And with every edict, every decision made without consulting the High Lords of Terra, the shape of his true intentions began to emerge. Guilliman has always been a builder. In life, he constructed Ultramar not as a series of military outposts, but as a civilization. His belief in order and reason was absolute, not because he disdained emotion, but because he saw what madness could become. He saw the warp, the heresies, the pride of his brothers, and decided that law must triumph where chaos festers. But in his rebirth, the scale of his ambition has grown. Guilliman no longer speaks as a general fighting for a throne. He speaks as if he is the throne. His imperial reforms bypass ancient tradition and rewrite the playbook of governance. His creation of the Primaris Marines, his control over the Indomitus Crusade, and his sweeping restructures of command all speak not of deference, but of destiny. Some cling to the illusion that Guilliman is merely holding the Imperium together, that he is acting in his father's name. But Guilliman has made it clear he finds the ecclesiarchy's dogma abhorrent, the High Lords pathetic, and the bureaucracy of the Imperium actively cancerous. He wears the mantle of Lord Commander, but it is a title born of necessity, not reverence. In private, he has spoken of his father's failures, not as a son grieving a loss, but as a peer weighing the shortcomings of another ruler. That is the voice not of a servant, but of a sovereign. What truly unnerves the traditionalists is Guilliman's independence. He issues decrees without consulting the Adeptus Ministorum. He tolerates the Adeptus Mechanicus only because he must, and even then, he favors Call, a techno-archaeologist who rewrites the laws of Mars in pursuit of Guilliman's vision. The resurrection protocols, the Primaris gene forging, the launch of new Crusade fleets without Terran oversight, all these acts scream of an emergent sovereignty. Guilliman is not restoring the Imperium, he is remaking it in his own image. There is also the question of scale. Guilliman does not confine himself to Macragge. He has reorganized the Segmentum Solar, restructured the command of the Segmentum Pacificus, and placed Ultramarine successors in critical posts across Imperial space. His reach now extends far beyond his own borders. These are not the actions of a chapter master. These are the machinations of a ruler in waiting. A man rebuilding not a province, but an empire. His writings, too, reflect this shift. The revised editions of the Codex Astartes read not as military doctrine, but as philosophical treatises. He speaks of a unified humanity, guided by strength, bound by law, cleansed of superstition. He writes not merely of war, but of justice, governance, and the need for a central guiding hand. To the faithful, these are the musings of a loyal servant. But to those who have studied ancient histories, real histories, not the censored volumes of Terra, the tone is unmistakable. Guilliman writes as emperors once did, in ages long before the Imperium, when men ruled by intellect and right, not by divine fiat. And this is where the true fracture lies. Guilliman does not worship the emperor as a god. He has never done so. He has tolerated the ecclesiarchy only because he must. He does not genuflect, he does not burn incense, he does not offer prayers. To Guilliman, the emperor was, and remains, a flawed genius, not a deity. This alone sets him at odds with the heart of modern imperial identity. But rather than challenge it openly, he undermines it through governance. He builds a system where faith becomes obsolete, replaced by function. Some say Guilliman is weary, that the burden of leadership grinds down even his superhuman mind. But exhaustion does not explain the clarity of his reforms. It does not explain the patterns in his appointments, the shape of his strategic deployments, the symbolic gestures he makes, favoring Ultramarine successors, establishing administrative continuity, investing in civil infrastructure. These are not the decisions of a man barely holding things together. They are the movements of a long-term strategist with a plan beyond mere survival. And that plan may well be to inherit the Imperium in truth, not by coup or civil war, but by default. If the High Lords die in their chambers, if Terra collapses beneath its own weight, who then remains? Who holds the armies, the fleets, the hearts of the people? Guilliman does. And when that moment comes, he will not need to raise a banner or issue a proclamation. He will simply continue ruling, as he has always done. Ultramar exists not merely as a bastion of strength, but as a functioning polity, an actual state within the skeletal framework of the Imperium. It is often called a realm, a sub-empire, but in practice, it is more autonomous and more efficient than entire segmenta. The Imperium relies on the facade of unity to survive, but within that brittle shell, Ultramar functions with a coherence and identity that borders on sovereignty. While technically part of the Imperium, it behaves as something far more independent, and it does so with quiet confidence. This structure begins at the top. The Tetrarchs of Ultramar serve not at the whim of Terra, but under the direct authority of Guilliman. These four lords, selected for loyalty, intellect, and vision, govern vast sectors of the Ultramar realm, each with relative autonomy under a shared doctrine. Their governance is not symbolic. It is a living administrative machine that coordinates military defense, planetary development, civic order, and interstellar logistics. The Imperium at large stumbles through endless red tape and obsolete protocols. Ultramar glides with clarity and purpose. Orders are not delayed by months of astropathic confusion. Decisions are not entangled in ritual. Ultramar acts, and it acts quickly. Economically, Ultramar is almost self-sufficient. Its agri-worlds feed not only themselves, but supply vital surpluses to war-torn imperial fronts. Its forge worlds, though still technically under Mechanicus control, enjoy privileged arrangements that reflect loyalty to Guilliman as much as to Mars. Its hive cities produce goods, soldiers, and bureaucrats who are actually trained to think. This level of productivity, this level of success, would be the envy of entire segmentum commanders, and it is guarded jealously. The export of Ultramar's systems, values, and methods is limited. They share success in the form of warriors and aid, but not the keys to the kingdom. Militarily, Ultramar is more than the Ultramarines chapter. It possesses its own void fleets, independent planetary defense forces, orbital defense networks, and intelligence corps. These are not auxiliary forces playing second fiddle to the Astartes. They are professional, battle-hardened military structures capable of coordinated campaigns across multiple systems. The integration between these forces and the Ultramarines themselves is seamless. This is not just power, this is structure. It is the backbone of a functioning war state, capable of defense and expansion without relying on the decrees of Terra. Even the role of the Adeptus Astartes within Ultramar defies imperial convention. The Ultramarines do not simply exist above their realm as distant angels of death. They interact with their worlds, govern them, educate them, and in some cases even adjudicate disputes. There is a civic dimension to their presence that recalls the old legends of demigod kings. Civilians do not merely fear the Ultramarines, they revere them, and more importantly, they understand them. The population is indoctrinated not with raw fear, but with pride, ambition, and identity. To be part of Ultramar is to belong to something greater, and to believe in its mission. This ideological cohesion is rare in the Imperium. Most Imperial worlds survive in isolation, their cultures warped by distance, fear, and the indifference of the greater machine. But in Ultramar, there is unity, not imposed by dogma, but fostered through civic pride and systemic reinforcement. It is a realm that actively resists fragmentation. When Guilliman launched the Indomitus Crusade, he left behind not chaos, but a functioning power structure. Ultramar did not falter, it continued. That is not just efficiency, it is resilience. And it begs the question, what exactly would change if Ultramar were to declare independence? Would the citizens notice? Would the bureaucrats falter? Would the armies waver? Likely not. Because Ultramar already behaves like a sovereign state. It sends representatives to imperial functions, but it does not await their orders. It accepts imperial tithes, but negotiates their terms. It contributes to the defense of the wider Imperium, but only in a manner that aligns with its interests. This is not rebellion. It is strategic autonomy masquerading as loyalty. Such independence is dangerous, not because it threatens open civil war. Guilliman has no interest in fracturing the Imperium, but because it offers an alternative. It shows a path forward that does not rely on blind faith, necrotic bureaucracy, or the cult of martyrdom. Ultramar is living proof that the Imperium could be something else, something better. And in a galaxy where hope is rare and heresy is defined by deviation, that proof is as terrifying as any demon. Ultramar has a flag, it has an anthem, it has laws, symbols, and myths. It educates its children to believe not only in the Emperor, but in the dream of a just society. These are not the features of a loyal province. These are the hallmarks of a hidden empire, one that has no need to declare itself because it already exists, fully formed, waiting. The Codex Astartes is often cited as Guilliman's greatest legacy, a document of war, of discipline, of order. But beneath its columns of strategy and regulation, there lies something far more insidious, a blueprint for control. The Codex is not merely a manual for the Adeptus Astartes. It is a philosophical weapon, a method by which Guilliman extended his grasp beyond the reach of Macragge, beyond even the bounds of Ultramar. It standardized the Astartes, compartmentalized their power, and embedded a framework of command that, intentionally or not, made him the hidden architect of nearly every loyalist chapter. To understand the power of the Codex, one must look at what came before it. The Legiones Astartes were vast, unregulated legions loyal to their Primarchs first and the Emperor second. They were cults of personality, each shaped in their creator's image, each a micro-empire. When the Horus heresy shattered the trust between brothers, the Codex was Guilliman's answer. A system to ensure that never again could any one leader command such devastating force unchecked. In theory, it was an act of humility and prudence. In practice, it was a masterstroke of political genius. By fragmenting the legions into chapters of 1,000, Guilliman removed the possibility of centralized rebellion, or so the surface logic goes. But in doing so, he also created a system where every chapter, old or new, had to look somewhere for direction, for precedent, for doctrine, and that somewhere was the Codex Astartes. Through it, Guilliman became the silent guide of tens of thousands of Space Marines, even those outside his own gene line. Successor chapters, especially, became wholly dependent on the Codex to define their structure, purpose, and battlefield identity. Whether they worshipped the Emperor as a god or followed divergent cultures, their bones were built on Guilliman's words. What makes this more potent is how the Codex evolved. Originally a strict manual, it gradually became a sacred text, a dogma in its own right. It is studied with reverence, quoted in battle, upheld in ceremony. In an empire where literacy itself is rare and most citizens know only superstition, the Codex became one of the few documents that still commanded intellectual loyalty. It provided not just rules of war, but a shared language of honor and protocol. And this language, this culture, is Ultramarine. Even chapters that pride themselves on divergence, like the Black Templars or the Space Wolves, define themselves in relation to the Codex. They rebel against it, reinterpret it, or reject parts of it, but always in its shadow. It is the center of gravitational force around which all other identities orbit. That is power. that is cultural hegemony. Moreover, Guilliman's authorship of the codex made him more than a primarch. It made him a philosopher king. His influence became woven into the subconscious of the Adeptus Astartes. When successors of unknown or broken lineage search for purpose, they turn to the codex. When new chapters are formed, they begin with its precepts. And when the Imperium needs warriors it can trust, it looks to the chapters who adhere most closely to Guilliman's model. Thus, compliance becomes power. And power breeds loyalty, not to Terra, not to the High Lords, but to the idea of Guilliman's order. This is where the specter of ideological control emerges. While Guilliman himself may not demand worship, the system he created ensures that his vision perpetuates itself. The Codex Astartes is self-replicating, self-justifying. Every new generation of warriors trained in its methods reinforces the original structure. There is no need for overt manipulation. The doctrine does the work. This becomes especially significant when one considers the cultural void within the Imperium. In a galaxy where billions live and die in ignorance, where even basic historical knowledge is suppressed, the Codex Astartes offers clarity. It is not just a military guide, it is a worldview. It teaches hierarchy, discipline, purpose. It instills identity, and it aligns all who follow it with the vision of its author. This influence also extends upward. Imperial Guard regiments that fight alongside Codex-compliant chapters often adopt aspects of their doctrine. Forge Worlds adapt their production standards to match the Codex's specifications. Even the Administratum and Munitorum adjust logistics to better align with Guilliman's ideals. In this way, the Codex becomes more than Astartes scripture. It becomes imperial infrastructure. In its most extreme interpretation, the Codex Astartes becomes a constitution in a galaxy without laws, a hidden binding agent. And Guilliman, through its living text, becomes not just a leader, but a lawgiver. His words outlive his orders. His strategy outlasts his campaigns. His logic shapes empires. And what happens when such a document is revised, as Guilliman has begun to do in recent years? What happens when he updates it, expands it, reinterprets it in light of modern warfare? It means the structure of the Imperium adapts to his thought. Not to consensus, not to faith, not to the demands of Terra, but to the living mind of Macragge's son. The Codex Astartes, then, is not a relic. It is a throne of ideas, and Guilliman still sits upon it. The Indomitus Crusade was not merely a military operation. It was a seismic event, a shockwave across the stars that redefined the balance of power in the Imperium. Its banners flew high with the iconography of unity, of salvation, of the Emperor's divine will. But behind the golden laurels and war hymns marched a truth far more nuanced, and perhaps far more dangerous. The Indomitus Crusade was an empire's reassertion of itself. At its helm stood Robert Guilliman, not as a mere commander, but as a sovereign with a vision. And through the roar of engines and the silence of void shields, his message was clear. The time of Macragge had come. From the moment of its inception, the Crusade bore the unmistakable signature of Guilliman's methodical genius. It was not a desperate reaction to chaos, but a calculated response. The opening of the Great Rift, the sundering of the galaxy, and the descent of half the Imperium into the Imperium Nihilus provided the perfect justification. A crusade was necessary, a counterstroke to the ruinous powers. But while Terra reeled from the psychic shockwaves and the High Lords bickered in their catacombs of red tape, Guilliman acted. He mobilized fleets, conscripted armies, and launched an armada the likes of which had not been seen since the Great Crusade. It is telling that this mobilization occurred with minimal consultation from Terra. The Lord Commander of the Imperium did not request permission, he gave orders. The political implications are staggering. In one stroke, Guilliman claimed the authority not only to act, but to lead. Not as a High Lord, not as a regent, but as a returned Primarch invoking the original mandate of unity. And the Imperium, fragmented and desperate, accepted it. Not with decrees, but with silence. Because none could deny that someone had to act, and Guilliman was already doing so. The scale of the Indomitus Crusade is difficult to comprehend. Thousands of vessels, millions of troops, entire segmentae reshaped by its passage, and at the center of this storm was not Terra, not the Ecclesiarchy, not the Inquisition, but Guilliman and his chosen commanders, many drawn from the Ultramarines and their successor chapters. The crusade was not just a military effort. It was a reshuffling of the stars, placing Ultramarine philosophy and Guilliman's command structures at the heart of Imperial defense. The influence of Macragge spread like wildfire, not by conquest but by necessity. Every planet liberated by the Crusade became part of Guilliman's moral and logistical dominion. Administrations were rebuilt in the image of Ultramar structure. Churches were moderated, logistics standardized, codex principles enforced. Imperial governors owed their loyalty not to the shadowed whispers of Terra, but to the shining reality of the Crusade fleet. Guilliman did not need to declare an empire, he simply extended one. And this expansion was not temporary. Even after the initial thrust of the Crusade ended, Guilliman left behind command structures, planetary governors, Crusade marshals, and infrastructure hubs. The bastions he established did not revert to prior authority. They became nodes in a growing network of Macragge's influence. It is a quiet empire, woven from duty, gratitude, and power. The people he saves remember. The commanders he appoints obey. And the void fleets he positions remain. Critics argue that Guilliman's hand was forced, that no one else could have rallied the Imperium in its darkest hour. That may be true, but the consequences remain. The Crusade created facts on the ground. New lines of supply, new chains of command, new loyalties. These are not easily undone. The High Lords of Terra may still hold their titles, but they no longer hold the initiative. That resides in the shadow of the Aquila Indomitus, a symbol that now rivals even the double-headed eagle itself. Even the Crusade's spiritual messaging diverged from traditional imperial dogma. While the ecclesiarchy tried to wrap the effort in layers of martyrdom and divine prophecy, Guilliman emphasized survival, unity, and competence. His speeches did not invoke the emperor's godhood. They invoked his dream. This subtle shift resonated deeply with sectors tired of stagnation and madness. To many, Guilliman represented not just hope, but a future that made sense. And the Primaris Marines, birthed from the depths of Mars and the designs of Belisarius' call, became the visible embodiment of this future. Taller, stronger, and forged from Guilliman's return, they were not just warriors, they were symbols. Their loyalty was not just to the Imperium, but to the man who had made them possible. Deployed en masse with the Crusade, these new warriors further cemented Guilliman's ideological supremacy. The Indomitus Crusade, then, was far more than a counteroffensive. It was a reconquest, not of territory alone, but of meaning. Guilliman reasserted not only his authority, but his vision. He shaped minds, rewrote structures, and embedded a new imperial doctrine across thousands of worlds. The map of the Imperium changed, but so did its heart. The Primaris Space Marines were heralded as the next step in human evolution, a triumph of science, strategy, and genecraft. But beneath the grandeur of their creation lies a more unsettling truth. They are Guilliman's children in every way that matters. Forged from his return, shaped by his vision, and deployed under his command, the Primaris are more than just warriors. They are instruments of reform, and possibly of succession. In them, we see not just a new breed of Astartes, but the emergence of a new order. From their very conception, the Primaris Marines stood apart. Engineered by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius' call under Guilliman's long-standing directive, they were the result of 10,000 years of forbidden science. Enhanced organs, superior training, and equipment designed from scratch. These warriors were not born from tradition, but from intention. They were designed to be better. Not just physically, but ideologically. They emerged not from ancient recruitment rites or forgotten rituals, but from laboratories and war councils. Their loyalty was conditioned not by heritage, but by clarity. And this clarity begins with Guilliman himself. Unlike the firstborn Marines, whose loyalties were often fractured by the echoes of legionary identity and ancient cults, the Primaris were indoctrinated into a new framework, one that bypassed the tumult of the heresy and went straight to Guilliman's idealized Imperium. They do not question the Codex Astartes. They do not inherit the grudges of old chapters. Many of them know no homeworld, no tribal mythos. Their loyalty is to the Imperium, but more precisely, to the vision of Guilliman that defines it. This ideological purity makes them the perfect instruments of Guilliman's reforms. Wherever the Indomitus Crusade advanced, it was Primaris reinforcements who took the lead. When Guilliman reorganized command structures, it was Primaris leaders who filled the gaps. Their rapid promotion was not solely due to merit, It was due to design. They were made to lead, made to obey, made to build. And build they did, not just in battlefields, but in bastions, governance, and thought. There is an eerie uniformity to the Primaris that separates them from their older brothers. Their armor gleams not with the scars of ancient wars, but with the sheen of standardization. Their doctrines are cohesive, their command hierarchy efficient. Even their speech, clean, measured, devoid of the Baroque flourishes or archaic idioms of older chapters, speaks to a new kind of Astartes. A breed that does not just fight for the Imperium, but is the new Imperium. In them, we see the fading of the old, the rise of the streamlined, the functional, the precise. This has not gone unnoticed by the firstborn. While many have welcomed the Primaris as brothers in arms, others view them with a deep and growing unease. Space wolves whisper of soullessness. Dark angels suspect hidden motives. Blood angels mourn the dilution of their bloodline. And most of all, they fear replacement. Because that, perhaps, is the unspoken purpose of the Primaris. Not reinforcement, but succession. Guilliman would never say it, but his actions speak for him. He does not seek to reform the Astartes alone, he seeks to remake them. There is a philosophical divide here that runs deeper than genetics. The firstborn were forged in the crucible of the Great Crusade, baptized in the heresy, and tempered by millennia of attrition. They are relics of a time when heroism was madness, and loyalty was a battlefield. The Primaris are born into order, into structure, into Guilliman's curated dream. They are not just new warriors. They are a rejection of everything chaotic, emotional, and Baroque about the Imperium's past. They are Guilliman's answer to a galaxy that has lost its way. Yet this purity is not without danger. Because in their perfection, the Primaris may lack what once made the Astartes truly human. The flaws, the contradictions, the raw passions that gave rise to both betrayal and greatness. A chapter like the White Scars of the Space Wolves is unpredictable, yes, but also alive, creative, adaptable. The Primaris, for all their might, may be too pure, too controlled, too sterile. They are not the sons of flawed Primarchs. They are the constructs of one vision. And what of their creators? Belisarius' call answers to no one but Guilliman. The vaults of Jean's seed he uncovered, the dark secrets he employed, the liberties he took, all of it was shielded under Guilliman's authority. If any other figure had sanctioned such massive biological experimentation, the Inquisition would have scoured them from existence. But with Guilliman's blessing, Call operates beyond oversight. This alliance between mind and mandate is unprecedented. It is also untouchable. The Primaris are not a legion, but taken together, across hundreds of new chapters, successor formations, and crusade battalions, they form a network, a decentralized but ideologically unified force. Many of these new chapters were raised with no ties to any firstborn predecessors. They owe their existence solely to Guilliman's will. And while they pay lip service to the High Lords, their true loyalty is less ambiguous. In a galaxy where loyalty is everything, this is the most potent tool Guilliman has ever wielded. Not armies, not fleets, not laws, but sons who believe in him, who fight for the vision he alone has seen. And if one day the Imperium fractures, if Terra falls or the ecclesiarchy turns against him, Guilliman will not be alone. He will have his warriors, his new breed, his true successors. There is a quiet indoctrination at work in the Imperium, not the brutal sermons of the ecclesiarchy, nor the fear-mongering of the Inquisition, but something more refined, more pervasive. It is the idea of the Ultramarine ideal, a cultural supremacy that has spread far beyond Macragge and embedded itself in the marrow of imperial military and civic philosophy. Wherever one finds order, discipline, and efficiency, one finds echoes of Guilliman. And more often than not, one finds the Ultramarines held up not merely as a chapter, but as the chapter, the archetype, the paragon, the unattainable standard. This is no accident. The Codex Astartes seeded the ground, and Ultramar's stability watered it. The Crusade brought that ideal to every corner of the galaxy. But it is the mythos, the narrative, that has taken root most deeply. In propaganda reels and solemn instruction, in training drills and ceremonial rites, the Ultramarine image reigns supreme. Their blue and gold sigils, their disciplined formations, their noble speeches, these have become synonymous with loyalty and righteousness. Even their statues, which now stand in conquered hive cities and devastated frontier outposts, radiate not just strength, but legitimacy. This soft power is far more insidious than banners and bullets, because once something becomes idealized, everything else becomes lesser by default. The Blood Angels are noble, but tragic. The White Scars are fast, but erratic. The Space Wolves are fierce, but wild. Only the Ultramarines are presented as whole, balanced, ideal. And that ideal, being so heavily associated with Guilliman's teachings, carries an implicit judgment. The closer you are to the Ultramarine model, the more faithful you are to the Imperium. Even outside the Astartes, this influence bleeds. Imperial Guard regiments now incorporate codex-derived doctrines. Planetary governors in liberated systems mirror Ultramaran administration. The Munitorum, long a morass of inefficiency, is slowly restructured around Guilliman's revised logistics flowcharts. Forge worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus begin aligning production to Ultramarine equipment specifications, not because they must, but because it is efficient. The cultural center of gravity has shifted, and it pulls inexorably toward Macragge. This is cultural imperialism, even if no one dares name it as such. And it generates friction. Chapters with proud histories feel the pressure to conform. Divergent cultures are subtly shamed, their traditions painted as relics of a more barbaric age. In a galaxy that prizes conformity over truth, this is the most powerful form of censorship, the kind that makes its victims doubt themselves. Some resist, of course. The Space Wolves snarl at Guilliman's reforms. The Black Templars preach their own vision of righteousness, but even their resistance defines itself against the Ultramarine standard. They cannot escape its shadow. It is worth asking, does Guilliman intend this? The truth is complicated. Guilliman's writings are filled with respect for diversity, cultural, strategic, even spiritual. But the systems he has rebuilt are not neutral. They are infused with his worldview. And when one man's vision becomes the template for trillions, no matter how rational, it ceases to be philosophy and becomes doctrine. Guilliman may not demand worship, but his ideas command it. The very structure of his reforms privileges his way of thinking, and those who thrive under that structure inevitably rise to prominence, further reinforcing the cycle. The result is a galaxy increasingly divided not by loyalty, but by alignment. Are you aligned with Guilliman's vision, or are you not? And if you are not, then you are an anomaly, a deviation, perhaps even a threat. This has chilling implications. Not all deviation is heresy, but when the center becomes fixed, all movement away from it looks like rebellion. The Ultramarine ideal, once a source of inspiration, becomes a measuring stick, and eventually a whip. It is also aesthetically imperial. The symbols of Ultramar are everywhere now, not just in war zones, but in art, in architecture, in fashion. Decorative motifs echo their laurel-wreathed purity. Children's tales feature Ultramarine heroes more than any other chapter. Even ecclesiarchal cathedrals in Guilliman pacified systems have adopted a blue-gold palette, subtly supplanting the traditional crimson and bone white of Terra. This is not conquest by force. This is conquest by aspiration. To the average citizen, this may seem irrelevant, but over time, the effect is cumulative. It redefines what it means to be imperial. Not a wide tapestry of cultural expression surviving beneath a shared banner, but a monochrome vision of blue discipline and golden order. And with each world that conforms, with each doctrine that aligns, Guilliman's influence solidifies. Not through tyranny, through admiration, through success. This is the genius and the peril of cultural supremacy. It does not burn worlds, it builds them. It does not command loyalty, it earns it. And in doing so, it reshapes the very soul of the Imperium. Guilliman's empire is not hidden in shadows. It is hidden in plain sight, in the hearts and minds of a people who no longer know where his vision ends and their reality begins. To the eyes of the other chapters, the Ultramarines are both admired and resented, often in equal measure. This is not merely sibling rivalry among the sons of the Emperor. It is a clash of identities, of values, of existential purpose. For the Ultramarines represent not only the most successful realization of the Astartes project, but also its most rigid. And as Guilliman's star rises, the shadows of dissent among his brotherhood grow deeper and darker. Among the most prominent of these tensions is the rivalry with the Space Wolves. The Sons of Lemon Russ have always embodied defiance, their chapter a fierce and unpredictable counterpoint to Guilliman's order. The Wolves reject the Codex Astartes not out of ignorance, but out of pride. They see it as a straitjacket, a cage for warriors who should be free to adapt and improvise. To them, the Ultramarines' obsession with structure is not wisdom, it is cowardice in the face of chaos. And while they have fought alongside their Codex-compliant cousins, there is little love in their glances, only a grudging respect born from shared bloodshed. The Dark Angels, by contrast, carry their secrets with the stoic weight of guilt. They neither fully embrace nor outright defy the Codex. Instead, they adapt it to their needs while maintaining their own clandestine inner hierarchy. To them, the Ultramarines are both an ally and a threat. Too clean, too transparent, too perfect. The unforgiven cannot abide perfection, for they know it is a lie. Guilliman's return only deepens this divide, as his scrutiny may one day uncover truths the Lion's Sons have buried for 10,000 years. The Blood Angels suffer in silence. Their curse, the Black Rage and the Red Thirst, is a daily battle against madness, and Guilliman's reforms, though helpful on the surface, cannot cure them. They look upon the Ultramarines with a kind of tragic envy. Where Macragge thrives in reason and symmetry, Baal lies in ruin. Where Guilliman builds, they mourn. And yet, they also recognize the necessity of his guidance. Dante, ancient and weary, has knelt to Guilliman not as a brother, but as a lord. That submission, though strategic, marks a turning point. The chapter of Sanguinius now fights not for its own future, but to preserve Guilliman's dream, even if it is not theirs. Other successors show even sharper divergence. The Black Templars, heirs of Dorne's zealous fury, bristle at Guilliman's secular pragmatism. They march to war not for stability, but for vengeance, for purity, for faith. Their crusades are holy wars, not logistical deployments. To them, Guilliman's disdain for the ecclesiarchy is nothing short of sacrilege. And yet, even they bend when the need arises, their ships joining his fleets when called. It is a tension that cannot last, where one vision must eventually dominate. Among the lesser-known chapters, the divide is just as pronounced. The Red Scorpions, obsessed with purity of gene seed, revere the Codex but view Guilliman's new creations, the Primaris, with deep suspicion. The Mantis warriors and lamenters, scorned by history and marred by tragedy, find no comfort in Guilliman's order. They see in his rise not salvation, but the return of a status quo that has always marginalized the flawed, the failed, the forgotten. Guilliman speaks of unity, but not all wish to be unified under a banner that demands their erasure. Even among the Ultramarine successors, subtle fractures appear. While many proudly trace their lineage to Macragge, others chafe under the weight of expectation. The Genesis chapter, the Novamarines, the Mortifactors, each walks a line between reverence and identity. Guilliman's return has made their parentage once again politically relevant, and with that comes both privilege and scrutiny. Some relish the renewed prominence. Others fear becoming mere extensions of Ultramar's will. This complex web of tensions reveals a deeper truth, that the Brotherhood of Astartes is not a monolith. It is a mosaic of fractured philosophies, old wounds, and competing dreams. Guilliman's rise forces every chapter to choose, to align, to adapt, or to resist. And in a galaxy of war, even such ideological choices carry the weight of blood. The risk is clear. As Guilliman's reforms spread, and as his cultural and military dominance solidifies, the lines between unity and hegemony blur. Chapters that once served the Imperium in their own way may find themselves increasingly marginalized, their autonomy questioned, their traditions eroded. And for warriors whose very identities are built on legacy, that erosion is intolerable. The seeds of resistance are there, quiet refusals, doctrinal deviations, reluctant compliance. None dare speak of secession, not yet. But in the deep vaults of the rock, in the wolf-haunted halls of Fenris, in the blood-stained crypts of Baal, the doubts grow. The question is no longer, is Guilliman the future? It is, can we survive that future with our souls intact? The uneasy dance between Roboute Guilliman and the ecclesiarchy is one of the most volatile nexuses of ideology within the Imperium today. On one side stands the returned son of the Emperor, a rationalist, a secular reformer, a man burdened by a galaxy teetering on the brink. On the other, the monstrous edifice of the Adeptus Ministorum, a theocracy built on fire, faith, and fear, wielding religion as both shield and sword. Their coexistence is not a partnership, it is a cold war of necessity. And at its heart is a contradiction that cannot last. Guilliman never accepted the Emperor as a god. He knew him, spoke with him, fought for him, bled for him. To Guilliman, the Emperor was a visionary mortal whose divinity was fabricated after his ascension, a desperate myth to sustain an empire collapsing under its own weight. In the aftermath of the heresy, Guilliman looked upon the burning remnants of the dream and saw not salvation in faith, but failure in fanaticism. And now, awakened into a galaxy utterly transformed by that very fanaticism, he finds himself a stranger, a heretic in a holy land bearing his father's name. The ecclesiarchy, meanwhile, thrives in Guilliman's absence. For 10,000 years it has ruled hearts and minds with the creed of the God Emperor. Its cathedrals sprawl across systems. Its sermons echo in the minds of trillions. It controls the imperial cult, dictates moral law, and justifies war with scripture. It is not simply a church, it is a regime, and one that tolerates no contradiction. That Guilliman lives and breathes yet refuses to bend the knee is not a theological dilemma, it is an existential threat. And so a dangerous tension festers. Guilliman does not openly defy the ecclesiarchy. He is too wise for that. He understands the delicate equilibrium that holds the Imperium together, a house of cards where even truth can be heresy. But in his policies, in his military doctrines, in the administrative reforms flowing from Macragge, the lines are drawn. He promotes reason, he rewards merit, he establishes bureaucracies that bypass the pulpit. When he speaks, it is not in parables, but in plans. To the ecclesiarchy, this is erosion. It is sedition without blood. The Synod Ministra cannot move against him directly. His power is too great, his popularity too entrenched, his return too critical to the Imperium's survival. But they can whisper. They can excommunicate lesser reformers in his orbit. They can declare doctrinal adjustments in contradiction to his orders. They can preach sermons that frame reason as pride and logic as arrogance. Guilliman, in turn, deploys loyal commanders and re-educates planetary governors to resist clerical overreach. It is a shadow war, waged not with bolters, but with belief. Nowhere is this clash more visible than in the systems liberated by the Indomitus Crusade. In these battered sectors, the population often turns to Guilliman with desperate gratitude. He is the savior who acted when Terra did not. And in his presence, they hear a gospel not of martyrdom, but of rebuilding. The ecclesiarchy, arriving after the smoke has cleared, finds its traditional hold weakened. Its symbols no longer inspire the same awe. Its dogma no longer commands automatic loyalty. To these populations, Guilliman is not a prophet, he is a reality. This ideological rift carries dangerous implications. For what is the Imperium without the ecclesiarchy? Can the machine of state function without faith? Can order be maintained by reason alone in a galaxy ruled by madness and demons? Guilliman believes it can. Or rather, he believes it must. But in doing so, he walks a line so thin it barely exists. To reform the Imperium is to challenge its soul, and the soul, once wounded, strikes back. There are whispers, always whispers, of ecclesiarchs conspiring to sanctify Guilliman's image into orthodoxy, to bring him into the faith whether he consents or not. Of shrines erected in his name, of relics attributed to him, of litanies that blur the line between Primarch and prophet. Guilliman, horrified, tears them down when he finds them. But the message spreads faster than censure. The more he resists, the more the faithful exalt him. In their eyes, his denial is humility, his actions are miracles. His secularism is proof of divine mystery, and so the tragedy deepens. Guilliman, the most rational being in a galaxy of superstition, is becoming a saint against his will. The ecclesiarchy, unable to defeat him, is beginning to absorb him. A living Primarch in an age of gods is too powerful a symbol to be ignored. And if they cannot destroy him, they will canonize him, one sermon at a time. This convergence is not a resolution, it is a countdown. For sooner or later, Guilliman will be forced to choose. To speak openly, to challenge the lie at the heart of the Imperium, or to become part of it. That choice may fracture the Imperium more completely than any war. For now, he waits, reforms, builds. But every new world that rises under his rule, every statue that bears his face, every prayer whispered in his name, brings the moment closer. There is a question whispered in the darker corners of the Imperium, one that no loyal servant dares speak aloud, but that lingers nonetheless. What if Ultramar broke away? It is a question born not of treason, but of observation, because Ultramar already functions as an autonomous entity in everything but name. Its military might, its political stability, its economic infrastructure, all of it could sustain a sovereign realm. And as Guilliman's influence grows, so too does the possibility that the hidden empire of Ultramar may one day stand alone. Strategically, Ultramar is more than capable. With 24 core worlds, each self-sufficient and fortified, it forms a bastion rivaling entire segmente. Its void fleets are among the most advanced in the Imperium. Its planetary defense networks, its standing PDF forces, and above all, the Ultramarines themselves ensure that no secessionist move would be easily countered. Add to this the Primaris chapters seeded throughout the region, all of whom owe their creation to Guilliman. And the picture becomes clear. This is a fortress realm, already prepared for self-reliance. Economically, Ultramar could endure, and perhaps even thrive. Its agri-worlds are fertile, its hive worlds productive, its mining colonies rich with resources. Trade routes, long established through the centuries of peace before the Cicatrix Maledictum, have been reopened under Guilliman's guidance. The Forge worlds under its influence operate with near independence from Mars, answering more to Guilliman's needs than to the Red Priests of the cult Mechanicus. In short, Ultramar does not need the Imperium. The Imperium needs Ultramar. Culturally, the people of Ultramar are already conditioned to see themselves as distinct. They are citizens of a realm, not just subjects of a galaxy-spanning empire. Their education is better. Their lives, while still harsh by modern standards, are organized, dignified, and guided by a clear civic ethos. They believe in Guilliman, not as a god, but as a philosopher king, a living embodiment of what the emperor might have been if he had walked among them as a ruler, not a distant divine. If Guilliman were to call upon them to declare independence, they would not hesitate. They would weep, perhaps, for the Imperium's fall, but they would not question. And herein lies the potential trigger: the fall. Should Terra collapse? Should the Astronomicon fail? Or should civil war erupt between the Ecclesiarchy and Guilliman's rationalist factions? The decision may no longer be Guilliman's to make. The conditions for secession could emerge not from ambition, but from necessity. A galaxy severed by warp storms, a capital world consumed by internal strife, a High Lord's Council reduced to impotence or worse. In such a scenario, Ultramar would not be seceding, it would be surviving. Fan theories abound in the darker recesses of the lore. Some believe Guilliman has already drafted a contingency plan, a blueprint for a successor empire that could rise should the Imperium fall. This second Imperium would be built not on faith, but on reason, not on the ashes of ancient war, but on the foundations of progress. Others believe that Guilliman is slowly shaping the Outer Imperium into this very construct, using the Indomitus Crusade not to reclaim lost territory, but to seed a network of loyalty beyond the reach of Terra's failing institutions. More radical ideas suggest that certain Ultramarine successors have already begun operating with near-total autonomy, reporting to Guilliman's command structure rather than the standard Imperial channels. These chapters, positioned at strategic sectors across the galaxy, could act as anchors in the event of a schism. Rally points for a new realm, prepared in silence, waiting for the right moment. If such a web exists, it would mean that the wheels of separation have already begun turning. The threat of civil war cannot be ignored. While Guilliman would never initiate such a conflict, the Imperium's rigid structure ensures that even the idea of autonomy invites reprisal. Should Terra move against Ultramar, politically or militarily, the result could be catastrophic. The Ultramarines and their successors would defend their home. The Primaris chapters would rally to Guilliman's banner. And the Imperium, already fraying at the edges, could shatter into warring states, each claiming to be the true inheritor of the Emperor's will. Yet Guilliman has never spoken of rebellion. He serves, fiercely, bitterly, but sincerely. His reforms, his crusades, his administrative structures all serve the broader Imperium. And that may be the greatest irony. The man most capable of seizing power is also the one most determined not to. But the gears of history do not care for intention. They turn regardless. And in the vast machinery of the Imperium, even the most loyal son may one day be cast as traitor, if only for the crime of succeeding where others have failed. If Ultramar broke away, it would not be with fireworks and proclamations. It would happen quietly. A shift in command protocols, a redirection of tides, a severance of astropathic links, a new anthem once sung in private, now rising across the stars. And when the rest of the Imperium noticed, it would already be too late. Not a secession. A birth. Within the vaults of Macragge, beyond the Codex Astartes, beyond even the reforms he openly publishes, there may lie writings that Guilliman has not yet dared reveal. Texts that explore not war, but governance. Not duty, but destiny. These hypothetical documents, if they exist, would not be manuals or protocols. They would be philosophies. Blueprints, not for survival, but for a rebirth of mankind. And they would not be written for today's Imperium. They would be written for the one that comes after. Guilliman is not a man of impulsive ambition. Every move he makes is calculated, justified, shrouded in necessity. But it is difficult to believe that a mind as disciplined as his, a soul that has stared into the abyss of what the Imperium has become, has not imagined another way. A better way. And if he has imagined it, he has likely written it down. Not for implementation now, while the ecclesiarchy breathes fire and the High Lords cling to ancient power, but for a future moment, perhaps inevitable, when the Imperium breaks so profoundly that rebuilding is the only option. We can infer the contents of such texts from the patterns Guilliman has already established. He believes in a secular state, guided not by superstition, but by reason. He respects the Emperor as a being of supreme intellect, not divine infallibility. He prioritizes governance, logistics, and civil order as the foundations of civilization, not worship, sacrifice, or terror. His reforms aim at sustainability, not desperation. And in the way he governs Ultramar, we see the seeds of a post-imperial order, one built not to perpetuate faith, but to realize potential. Imagine, then, what might lie within those hidden pages. A constitutional outline for a decentralized human federation, unified by values rather than decrees. A treatise on the psychological conditioning required to replace religious dogma with civic identity. A long-term strategy for integrating abhuman populations into a wider social contract without resorting to extermination or marginalization. Perhaps even, though it would border on the heretical, a framework for post-Astartes warfare, wherein humanity defends itself without relying on demigods. More dangerously still, such writings might include a critique of the Imperium's institutions, an internal audit of corruption, inefficiency, and philosophical stagnation. Guilliman has never hidden his disdain for the ecclesiarchy, the High Lords, or the bloated bureaucracy of the Adeptus Terra. But open rebellion is not his way. What he may have done instead is document their failures in private, not to dismantle them now, but to ensure that when they fall, something better can rise in their place. There are stories, denied by the Ultramarines of course, that Guilliman has a private archive, accessible only to a handful of trusted lieutenants and data servitors, containing theoretical constructs too volatile to be shared. Call, perhaps, has seen them. Maybe certain tetrarchs have read fragments. These are not plans for rebellion. They are safeguards. They are contingency maps for the day when the Imperium as we know it can no longer continue, when someone must pick up the pieces and build anew, not from faith, but from understanding. These writings, if they exist, may be intended not for Guilliman himself, but for his successors, for the leaders of a second Imperium, or even a post-imperial humanity. They may contain instructions on how to preserve scientific knowledge, how to train leadership free of cultish indoctrination, how to build social structures that do not require fear to function. In essence, they would be a Rosetta Stone for rebuilding civilization, not as it was under the Emperor, but as it might be under his son. What Guilliman fears, perhaps more than chaos, is entropy, the slow rot of inertia masquerading as stability. His entire being rebels against it. He does not seek to burn the Imperium, but he sees it as already burning, slowly, invisibly from within. His writings, real or imagined, would be the water. Or, if too much time passes, the seeds to plant something after the fire. Of course, such texts could never be published. To circulate them would be to invite inquisitorial purging, civil unrest, and the collapse of what cohesion remains. But hidden texts have power. They linger, they inspire. And if the day comes when Terra no longer burns with the Emperor's psychic flame, when warp storms cut off holy Mars, when the Primarch is all that remains of Imperial unity, then perhaps those writings will emerge. Not as rebellion, but as salvation. For now, they are myth, fan theory, the hopeful hallucinations of those who see Guilliman not just as a commander, but as a philosopher king in exile, patiently preparing for the rebirth of a species. But if they exist, and if they endure, they may one day be the founding documents of a new age. The Hidden Empire, after all, is not just a place, it is an idea. And ideas, once born, do not die. In the shifting storm that is the Imperium of Man, Roboute Guilliman stands alone, a figure of both reverence and suspicion, clarity and contradiction. He is the Emperor's son, yet refuses to deify him. He is the Imperium's savior, yet reshapes it in ways that threaten its very identity. He commands armies, inspires billions, rewrites doctrines, and all without a crown. But the deeper question, the one no war council or shrine dares confront, remains. Is Guilliman preparing to inherit the throne, or to replace it entirely? The Ultramarines are not simply the noblest of the Astartes. They are the architects of a parallel Imperium. From their founding ethos to the Codex Astartes, from the gleaming streets of Macragge to the war-scorched stars of the Indomitus Crusade, they carry with them not just bolters, but a philosophy, a model, a future. Guilliman is not interested in loyalty for its own sake. He wants results, progress, continuity. And in a galaxy where stagnation is synonymous with survival, such a vision is revolutionary. But revolutions need not be bloody. They can arrive slowly, through policy, through precedent, through expectation. Guilliman's empire grows not through conquest, but through competence. His Primaris sons do not preach his greatness, yet live as proof of his vision. His reforms are not enforced, they are adopted. His ideals spread not by mandate, but because they work. And as the galaxy watches, the truth becomes harder to ignore. The Imperium is already changing. The question is no longer if, it is who will shape what comes next. The ecclesiarchy clings to its sacred traditions. The High Lords stagnate in ceremonial decay. The Mechanicus protects ancient mysteries more than it innovates. But Guilliman builds, plans, leads. Even his enemies must admit this. And it is this quiet, relentless competence that makes him not merely a leader, but a contender, perhaps the only one left. And so we are left with a galaxy on a knife's edge. If Terra falls, Ultramar stands. If the light of the Astronomicon dims, the philosophy of Macragge will burn brighter. And if Guilliman ever decides that the Imperium must be reborn, not reformed, not restored, but remade, then the hidden empire he has built will become visible, undeniable, and unopposable. Not through rebellion, not through war, but through inheritance, through destiny. For now, he remains the Lord Commander, the dutiful son, the reluctant ruler. But beneath that surface, the machine turns. The doctrine is written, the warriors are trained, the worlds are aligned. Guilliman may not seek to rule alone, but if the time comes, he will be ready. And the Imperium may not even realize that the transition has already begun. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets of Ultramar and the hidden empire it might become, make sure to subscribe. We'll be exploring even more dark truths, fan theories, and hidden histories from the Warhammer 40k universe. The Emperor protects, but sometimes his sons do more than that.